So, Tiffany, thank you so much for this lovely introduction, and I am so excited to be here with you with this very special audience, my first speaking opportunity here in Madison, since I'm very new still to Madison. I will be sharing with you some of my work, and what, most importantly, I really want it to be relevant to you. I really, really care about that, so please, if there are any questions, you can interrupt me anytime. You may raise your hand first, but you can also just shout out loud. Before I go into the topic, I would like for you to know a little bit about me so that you know who you're dealing with, right? I was born in Canada. I grew up in Hamburg, Germany, and I've lived in France where my son Nico was born. He's actually 25 now. And last week I was over in Germany. He's very excited. He's about to start his first 40-hour job. He's very stressed about that. As a junior consultant, and so as a mom, I'm really proud. And on March 13th of 2020, I heard at 6 a.m. in the morning from Paul, my now husband, that the US borders would close the next day, on midnight, right? This didn't go through my brain, it went through my heart, and I knew exactly what to do. I packed up everything I owned in 24 hours. In 2 suitcases, and arrived here 6 hours before the borders closed. I've been here since, and guess what? He and I got married on April 11th, 2020. So it's today our 2-year anniversary. So, a little bit about my credentials, you could say. I will keep it short. I'm a Master Certified Coach for the International Coaching Federation. That means that I have more than 6,000 hours of coaching under my belt. I've designed and facilitated innumerable leadership development programs from small companies to large-sized international global corporations. I'm also a lead coach in my own business coaching program, where I'm very excited and passionate about teaching coaching skills and the coaching stance to leaders. And finally, I'm an agile organizational consultant, and I'm very passionate about helping clients become what I call collegially led, self-steering, and highly adaptive in times like these. One of my biggest passions, you see actually here on the lower left, I don't know if you're familiar with it, nonviolent communication. I help organizations become deeply grounded in what I call human connection, in trust, and in participation, with the help of the approach by Dr. Marshall Rosenberg, NBC. This is a very small, let's say, extract from my clients I already mentioned, or Tiffany did, Airbus, Adidas, Xerox, and many, many more. And I hope to be thriving, of course, in the United States as well. So far, I have made it to the Wisconsin University of Madison, and also to the American Civil Liberty Union's Wisconsin Leadership Team. So I've been working with them so far. So, what are we going to cover? This is quite a list, and I do want to point out, in the end, because I'm told that some of you may be already on your way out, I'm really hoping that you stay, because I would like to share with you some resources so that you can go deeper into anything that you find interesting. I would like to give you a takeaway that you can apply this afternoon as you go into the next meeting. Some thoughts, some questions, something that will remind you to do something different. And I would like to speak about a special offer that I call a generative interview. So, VUCA, can I see a show of hands? Who of you have heard of this acronym, VUCA? Ever heard of it? Oh, that's great. That's very good for me. So, just to give you a little idea, the world that leaders are facing today is VUCA. And I will speak, of course, more about what that means in detail. Second, this is our principles or our fundamental beliefs as Second Freedom, is that we have what we call conventional minds. And that these conventional minds have worked in the past, but they're actually not yet suited for what we're dealing with today, with information overload and so forth, and definitely not yet suited for the future. There's much, much information, and I will share some of it with you that signals how urgent that is. Third, this is the good news, our minds, leaders' minds, and this is what we've been doing and gathering some data, can be retrained. And by retrained, I actually mean not just a little bit of change. I mean an upgrade, like a paradigmatic shift in how you see the world and how you see yourself in it. So, our 3 tenets by Second Freedom are VUCA leadership, even as something that we call an emergent property can be measured. Second, VUCA leadership can be developed and sustained by what we call overriding the biological wiring of the brain. And third, we can accelerate this process with some of the advanced scientific techniques and specific proven practices that we have cultivated, you could say, and been applying for the last decade. Okay, great leadership cannot be created. I mean, I don't know how you see this, but we have found this to be true. It is what we call an emergent property. What we mean by that is that it manifests from the interaction of a multitude of different factors and conditions. So there is no formula. Otherwise, we would have all these amazing, great leaders out here, and I will give you some data that proves that that's actually not the case. We are trying really hard, but the effectiveness is still not quite where we need it to be. So we kind of know great leadership when we see it, right? But you cannot measure something that is an emergent property. For example, like happiness. Happiness is another emergent property. You can't predict it, but you have certain factors like financial stability or health that help you, but it's not really to be measured directly. What we can do, and that's what we specialize in, we measure the conditions that most likely lead for a leader in the moment, also when they're under pressure, to show up as a strong leader in how they think and how they behave, especially in terms of decision making. So, why measure leadership effectiveness? We believe there is a new normal of business, and this is VUCA, and now I'm finally coming to what that means. It's an acronym that was coined actually by the US military in the 1990s when they realized that the fundamental nature of their enemies had changed. And since then, the acronym has also been taken on by the business people who recognize that this is not just something relevant for the military and in wartime, that this is something that we are exposed to ourselves every day. So what does that mean? Volatility. That's really speaking to the pace of change, the increasingly rapid pace of change. Just think of anything that you're dealing with right now in your business and how fast things are changing every day, right? So we actually have statistics from a source that's called Basics Research Group, an information overload research group, and they have found that the amount of information that we all have accessible doubles every 12 hours. Now what does that mean for your decision making? When you make decisions based on information that you have from yesterday and they're already, right? I mean, that's amazing. That's what we have to deal with. And just to put that into perspective, by the end of World War II, knowledge was doubling every 25 years. 25 years are now 12 hours. And that's something your mind has to deal with. So how do we cultivate that? That's something that we have been exploring. So because things are changing so much, we're dealing with novelty. Novelty does not mean change. Novelty really means transformation. The form of your mind needs to change, not just new input. It's not enough. I will speak about that later. So in uncertainty, we can't use the past as the predictor anymore. So what else do you bring then, if you cannot bring your expertise and your experience? It takes a new mindset to explore and to discover that. That's what we help to cultivate. And when we can't use the past as a predictor of the future anymore, then that leads to complexity. Because as things are happening, it's hard for you and me and us to understand what are these so-called cause and effect relationships. And that's what our brain has been wired to do. We look at reality, and all the time we're trying to make connections, like this is the cause of her mood, and this has happened, and it's all a construct, obviously, right? And that's the best that we can do, because that's what we have learned, and it's not good enough anymore. So with complexity, we find a lot of unknown unknowns, right? There is something called ambiguity. And we need to keep asking ourselves, what is actually happening? What's the nature of the problem that I'm dealing with? What are we actually trying to get aligned on? We have to keep asking. And we have found with Second Freedom, this is very consistent across all of our clients that we're working with today. They live in the VUCA world, they don't always know it, but when we help them understand this new map, it becomes really helpful to them. So leaders are faced with more and more complexity. That's what I'm stating, and I would love to hear also from some of you some examples, and are most often overwhelmed with it. That's what we're finding. Why is that? I would like to share some statistics with you, and I will be pretty brief because I have more to come. So let me state it again. What we are finding, and this is based on a lot of diagnostics and assessments that we've done with leaders, individual leadership teams, and entire organizations. The nature of your mind, we can call it conventional. And conventional in this context does not mean traditional or conservative. Conventional means this is what society, especially in the West, is fostering, is rewarding. Right? In hierarchical structures, in for-profit organizations, there's a certain way of being and thinking that is making you successful. And that's it. And so there's something like a vertical ceiling we can observe. And this is not just theoretical. We see the impact of this gap in our daily lives, and that's why I would like to share with you this. Just take a look at this. I don't have to read it, maybe. Is this something you recognize for yourself? So one leader, I showed this to the other day, she said, you know what, I do recognize myself, and I feel really a bit embarrassed because I feel that me and my colleagues often, we tie our productivity and our sense of success to this overload. It's almost like we crave this, even though it's the worst thing that we're dealing with. So that's something I found really interesting, she said. So, what happens when conventional minds meet VUCA? Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. Typically, and I will just give you three. There are hundreds of more. Three things that we observe. Instead of recognizing that uncertainty now is normal and must be approached with a stance of curiosity and inquiry, leaders still believe sometimes, especially when under pressure, that it is potentially threatening and must be approached with caution. Do you get the difference of how you meet the challenge? Either you're coming from caution, or you're like, well, that's the new normal. I mean, of course I'm walking towards it. There's nothing threatening here. It's a very different stance. In every meeting, you can make that difference. Second, instead of understanding that control is a myth and actually does more harm than good. I mean, if I were to talk to you, all of you probably, one-on-one, you would agree probably, controlling today is pretty much out of date and doesn't work. When you get under stress, that's one of the things that you start doing. At least in how you think about the problem and the solution. That's what we have found. So leaders then tend to believe they must maintain control at all costs. And the third one is, in complexity, instead of focusing on a few selected, coordinated strategies to achieve maximum impact, leaders, this is our observation over and over again, respond with activism. They try to do more faster than they can, and this leads to burnout. You've probably seen it, right? And it's just not effective. It's a default, it's a reflex, yes, I get it. And it's a reflex from a certain way of thinking that we call conventional. Okay. Outdated thinking leads to mistakes. We have found, not just us. And these mistakes have real consequences. Only 18% of organizations say their leaders are very, very effective at meeting business goals. 18%. Well, you pair this with 71% of organizations that do not feel their leaders are able to lead them into the future. Bad management costs the US economy $398 billion annually, and low employee engagement. I'm sure some of you have already listened to these. These are out in the news often. I just want to bring it into your awareness to really say, this has got something to do with me in a way. This is not just statistics. This has got something to do with what we do collectively and how we understand leadership or misunderstand it. The turnover rate in 2020, the voluntary turnover rate was 25%, and as you all know, is rising. And these two now are my favorite. 3 out of 4 employees report that their boss is the most stressful part of their job. I mean, you don't intend that. I mean, that's clear, right? And 65% of employees say they would take a new boss over a pay raise. And that's not because you are doing a bad job, because you don't have nothing better to do. It's because you're maybe hitting the limit of the way you understand your job. And that's the good news, because there's great potential lying ahead. So what do we do about it? And actually, before I go into what we think you can do about it, I would like to drill down into one more specific thing, which is a common mistake. One of the most common mistakes that leaders make when it comes to decision making. And decision making, obviously, is one of the core leadership skills. So, in complex environments, leaders tend to misdiagnose the nature of the problem that they're actually facing. To take the moment to realize, what is it actually that I'm dealing with? And some of you may also be familiar with the model that helps or is trying to help us navigate this territory of complexity in terms of decision making by Dave Snowden. Can I see a show of hands? Anybody familiar with this framework? Wonderful. So what this means is you can, before you make that default decision, just because you have a hammer and it's worked in the past to see more or less, a nail everywhere you go, you take a moment now to navigate, to step back and to see what is the domain. What's the fundamental nature of the problem or challenge I'm dealing with? Simple, complicated, complex, and chaotic. I will go this way around as I illustrated quickly for you. And actually, we can say on this side, on the right-hand side, simple and complicated is what we can say are predictable. These are the known knowns. They're obvious, they're clear. Up here are the unknown knowns, they are known, and over there on that side is what we call unpredictable. And that should wake us up and remind us that that takes a different way of thinking and leading, but mostly thinking and meaning making. A quick walkthrough to illustrate what these 4 mean, because I then want to indicate also what is that main common mistake that leaders make. Let's say you want to drive your car. The very simple challenge you have is you want to start it. You need the key. What you do is you sense into, this is the question, you need to find the right key that fits to this car, you pick it, you start it, done. Fine. That's what you also find in your organization. Simple, standardized processes. You don't have to think about it, it's clear. When it comes up here, you sense and you need to analyze. So you need somebody who has the knowledge and the expertise. That is not available to everyone, but it can be done. Like a liver transplant, very complicated. Lots of expertise and experts are needed, but we get it done most of the time, pretty well. Complex. Imagine now you're in a traffic jam. So if you had here the challenge to start the car with the key up here, this would have been the car broke down and you needed the expert. They analyze, they fix it, it's done, and now you're in a traffic jam. That's complex. Many, many, many factors that we cannot even really maybe identify come together to find yourself in this situation. What you now need to do is very different in nature. You Instead of trying to analyze and gather more data, you want to probe, you want to experiment, you want to be comfortable with not knowing. Because the target that you think you are pursuing is constantly moving. So it's not about just out there that is changing. What needs to change is how you make meaning of this problem, how you think about it. Because if you don't recognize that, you will keep coming back maybe from the analyze and let's gather more data, more data, more data. So, I would like to point out the typical mistakes could be one of these. To apply a standard operating solution where actually a conversation with real human beings would be needed. Or, like I said, gathering more data where we actually need something that is more about experimenting, more empirical, right? Where we become agile, where we do the incremental, we go a little bit and then we do the stand-up and we do the retrospective and so forth. And we will misdiagnose the complex challenge for a complicated one. These are the three, that seem to belong to one family. So I would like for you now to just take a moment, because now I've been talking so much. It's really about you. I would like for you to take a moment. When was a challenge recently? And it's not about right or wrong. It's about taking a moment to maybe apply what you are stimulated, perhaps, by listening to me. When was a moment where you misdiagnosed a challenge? And this can go in all directions, right? You can misdiagnose and say, oh, we believe this is complicated, let's speak to our experts and waste some precious time. You can also take a simple challenge and misdiagnose it for a complex one, right? And that also is not quite appropriate and waste some time. So just take a moment, maybe half a minute or so, and reflect by yourself, with a neighbor. When was that?
That was interesting statistic. 2/3 of people with different thoughts. But you're getting nothing next year, and you can report to somebody else. That's an mistake. Yeah, this
See that same
Okay, let's hear maybe one or two. What have you found where perhaps you misdiagnosed the nature of the challenge that you were about to solve? Any idea? Any example? Okay? Let it sink in, that's fine. I will move ahead and maybe some more ideas will help us. So we asked ourselves, so why do so many leaders do this thing that we call misdiagnosing? I mean, they're great leaders that we work with, right? And so we keep seeing that when we do our assessment, our 3D assessment that we do, that this conventional thinking and response to the challenges that we have in the 21st century, that this gap actually may be the core cause. So I would like to bring in a core differentiation or distinction that some of you may have heard or may not. I think it's still pretty new and novel. On the left-hand side, we have skills, right? You learn new things like agile practices. I mean, who of you have recently or in the last 3-4 years heard about these and you are practicing them? Can I see? New practices, new skills to become more agile. Yeah? The thing is, you see, this is a container. If that is your mind, your way of thinking, your meaning making, I will say more about that in a while, well then that is full at some point. And this information overload and the skills that you're adding will not really do much because it's not just what you know, it's how you know what you know. I don't know how many times I introduced agile project practices into pretty traditional organizations because the top wanted that to happen, and somehow we didn't put the focus on growing the cup. A lot of money was wasted there, a lot of frustration, because if I just get these practices and nobody helps me understand why that makes sense in the bigger context, I will do it to please my boss for a while, and then as soon as I can, I won't. I've seen that so often. So we're talking here about what we call the horizontal learning. So you increase your skills, that's great. And at the same time, there's something missing, which is growing the cup, as my friend calls it. So one is capability or skills, and here's the mindset and the capacity. And there's something we can do about this. We can assess it. We can measure the way you make meaning of the world, and why you respond to complexity the way you do, and what is on the other side if you were to become more curious and were to work on that, which is actually a quite enjoyable thing, as I find. So here's the vertical development versus the horizontal learning. This is a nice example. The stages of development you see here. There's a child psychologist, maybe some of you have heard of him. His name was Jean Piaget in the last century. He found this amazing thing that he could describe these stages of development that are qualitatively different in how children make meaning of the world, the way they understand the world. They jump, you could say. I'll give you one example. Let's say there are two children standing on a very tall building. One is about this big and the other one is about this big. And they're looking down into the busy streets of the city, and the smaller one says, "Look down there! They're all ants!" And the taller one says, "Oh, look down there! They all look like tiny ants." So the second one includes perspective and distance. That is a shift in meaning making. That is fundamental. So what we have found is that it's not true that this is just happening to children and then you're an adolescent and a young adult and you have a rational way of thinking, you go to university and that's it. That's not it. It goes on. This journey goes on throughout your entire life. The only challenge is, as a child, it happens pretty much naturally. As you engage with the world, you're fostered, you're encouraged to overcome all these obstacles. And as an adult, when you make it in this world to a certain success, why would you continue to grow if society is not asking this of you? We have found that to be true, that there is this vertical seed. Interesting here also is the child over here can remember what it's like to make meaning of the world this way. And say, oh, this is how you oh, okay. So that comes with a kind of responsibility of a more mature way of thinking, to do something that we call transduce, which is to understand where the other person is coming from in terms of their meaning making, and to meet them there. And to help them maybe also grow into a later stage. Because from here, from an earlier stage of meaning making, for example, I will speak about that later, as an expert that likes to drill down into detail. I have a client right now, actually a client and a superior. She needs him to see more of the bigger picture. And he's been at DHL, I could say, for 25 years. And he just can't bring himself to see the bigger picture because he knows too much. He keeps saying, I need more time, and it drives her crazy. So this is a wonderful thing for me, I think, and I can share it with you. You can sometimes, when you come up to this frustration, remember, are they not willing to be a better collaborator, or do they not bring the capacity? And when they don't bring the capacity, it's not intelligence. It's not intelligence, it's meaning making. 3 directions, you could say. Vertical development in one direction and in another direction. So it goes up, and it can also go down, what we call fallback. So when you're stressed, when you're triggered, your emotions, your hormones come up, then you tend to also fall to a much earlier stage, which is often about survival, right and wrong, winning, dominating, even though you may already have landed somewhere else. And on the horizontal, again, we have the learning. And I just want to give a very brief overview of what we do. We measure these 3 dimensions because that's what seems to be the most effective for now. We measure the action logic, the logic behind your action. These stages that are predictable for children are predictable for every single one of you too. They're like a set of filters. This meaning-making machine, as you can say. Has anybody tried to meditate here by any chance? Some meditation? Oh yeah, wonderful, great. And if you're anything like me, when you started, somebody told you to quiet your mind, focus on your breath. You tried. It lasted 3 seconds. Oh, and then it became 5. Oh, and then it became, if you're lucky, it became 12. Because that meaning-making goes on all the time. So, action logic and meaning-making are closely tied together, and we can measure the way you make meaning of the world. And we can help you grow more, let's say, effective on the action logic or developmental stage where you're at, and you can kind of inhabit more of the houses, of the rooms in the house and the strengths that you have there. We can help you understand where you fall back to when you feel attacked or something like that. And we can also help you see maybe the problems that you're having and the conflicts that you're having are all great harbingers and invitations for you to grow into your next stage of development. So what we also do when we measure the horizontal learning, we can assess what skills do you have, and not just any skills, but the ones that the lexical assessments measure. The VUCA skills that make sense in the face of complexity, so we can assess that. And to round it up, we do something like a reality check. Because that's great when you think that you are that effective. But what about your peers? What about your direct reports? And what about the board? And when we put all of those together, and we have a lot of stakeholders interview as well, then we see certain dynamics that go even beyond 1 + 1 + 1 makes 3, where we see a bigger picture, where we can help you understand the meaning making of yourself, of your executive leadership team, and of the organization. Okay, this is a very simple graphic to show us the 3 main developmental stages. So again, these meaning making stages, starting as an adult and as a leader, most relevant is something called socialize. And this is based on Harvard professor Robert Keegan's work. Socialized mind is the first conventional mind, the one where we subordinate our impulses and our self-interests to society or to a community. We become part of society. We become a diplomat. We please often. We have the main motif to belong, to be liked. And this is a great stage to be at because that's the kind of person in your organization that remembers every anniversary. They bring the cake. They do the fun stuff. They make it feel really nice. And it's not enough as a leader. So if you're anything like me, and I've had a leader in my past who I would think, from how I see it today, was very much operating from this action logic. And maybe you also know some leaders. They sometimes go into one meeting and they're very excited about what's happening there, and they're like, yes, that's what we're going to do. Half an hour later, they go to another meeting, and they again say, yes, that's what we're going to do. And they don't notice that it's diametrically opposed, right? Again, is it because they are not intelligent enough? No. It's probably they don't bring the capacity, and there's something we can do about it, right? So that's one of my favorite examples of the diplomat leader. The one is also socialized is a very dependent one. It's very much where we don't have our own inner voice yet. So we scan our environment the whole time, like what's expected of me? So this is an outside-in person, Robert Keegan calls it. The self-authoring is the one, the typical leader today. Own inner voice, own inner set of values. I have a vision, I have a mission, I know how to empower other people. And it's finally the first step or the stage where a leader is open to feedback. They say, give me feedback. I need to optimize. The self-authoring is very driven, mostly chasing time, also prone to burnout often. And here the downside to the self-authoring is not just that they are achievers, they know how to achieve. Goals, KPIs, they know how to do it. That's why they go to the places of power. But the downside often is that they don't have a reason to question their worldview. Nobody really, in general, questions it enough. Because society doesn't really make them. You basically, when you look at the meaning making, and we have data for this, in societies, in not just organizations, but really countries, we can say, if you hit that meaning making, there isn't enough incentive for you to grow beyond, and that's a problem. Because our world is changing, and our minds are not. So what we need actually is, and this is what we call first freedom, you become free from what others think and expect of you so that you can actually have a constructive conflict. Or here you go into second freedom. From self-authoring to self-transforming is a big deal because now you know how to handle your ego. You now know how to stand aside. You now know that your perspective is very relevant. There's only one of many. And that in order to respond to complexity in a really effective way, you need to be very curious and inquisitive about different perspectives. You need to be able to challenge the status quo. Be the one in the room when everybody says, yeah, let's do that. You know, we've worked hard and now we have an idea. Can you be? Do you bring the capacity to say, wait a moment? And then not be attractive, you know, as you kind of throw that bomb into the room. And often, you ask then a question where everybody's like, whoa, I have never thought about it this way. That's what we mean by self-transforming. When you look at this line down here, this is your self-regulation. How do you regulate your impulses, your own needs, your emotions? You can imagine when you're socialized, very much dependent on what others think and expect from you, you're pretty reactive. You know, you're, stressed just by default. Self-authoring becomes more the creative and realizes I can be confident, I have expertise, I have a vision, and if I'm not successful here, I will find a job elsewhere. There's a pretty strong grounding in self-confidence. And now we need to go to this place where this strong personality knows how to gracefully stand aside and become an enhancer, a facilitator, somebody who is not just doing it because they've maybe participated in one of my workshops, I've seen that over and over again, but really cultivate that as a way of being deeply curious about what's wanting to happen, not what I think should happen. What is wanting and needing to happen when we look at this complexity? One of my favorites, and I need to look at the time because I've taken longer than I wanted to, but I do want to share with you a little bit here. Before I go into it, again, this is my dear teacher, Dr. Thomas Binder from Germany, Berlin. He actually had this idea of describing the journey from conventional to post-conventional because it is so important for our times today. He speaks about the first journey and the second journey, the first freedom and the second freedom. As I walk you through these stages, I would like for you to reflect, where do you place yourself here? In terms of where do you operate from most of the time? What's already available to you when conditions are really great, if you're lucky and you're in a supportive environment? And when you get under pressure, because numbers aren't great, or whatever, what do you fall back to? Do you become the pleasing one? Do you become the one that says, I have to dominate? I have to win, regardless of others? We see that in development. Oh, no, and the second thing, please also reflect who comes to mind. Do you have maybe some diplomats around you that you've made place here, or some experts, or whatever? So through this journey, we see there is an oscillation between, I'm either focused on I, and if you remember the self-authoring, the strong, heroic leader today, and I know I'm being black and white here, it's not just that, but as an essence, it's more about, my vision. I have a lot of expertise and experience and so forth, so I. And now it's about becoming more of the other and the collective. How do I serve? The idea of servant leadership is very much to be located here. I am part of many, but not as the pleasing diplomat, but from a higher consciousness. Okay, so pre-conventional, this is something that we can't fall back to when we're under pressure enough. To get the most I can get regardless of others. This is a mindset that is very understandable because he or she thinks the world is a very dangerous place. I have to survive. I have to protect myself. And if there are rules, I will only follow these rules if I have to fear that I will get punished otherwise. That's a good reason to follow a rule. But other than that, no. That's changing when we now grow and mature into the first conventional stage where it's about, like I said, to be part of. I am a wonderful, harmonizing, mediating, mitigating person, and we need those people, but not necessarily in a leadership position. As we increase our maturity and our ability to handle complexity, this is our journey of individuation, of becoming this one individual. We now take, instead of listening to the outside voices of society, our family, and so forth, and mistake that as our inner voice, we now do something different. We now become very analytical. Facts and data. I'm objective. There's a solution to everything, and we need to be efficient and competent. So I like to tie this, and I know sometimes I come across as a bit provocative, but lean management is, I would say, like the essence here, to say we can manage the world and we can make it more efficient. That's very deeply grounded in this mindset, in this worldview, that we can do that with life and with systems. This one has a little bit more openness to feedback than this one, but this one needs an expert. If you're not an expert, I'm not going to listen to your feedback. And I needed to be behind closed doors. Very different here. The self-authoring is over here. This is about achieving and being effective. So like I said, this one is very effective and achieves the goals, is a wonderful leader, but not yet capable of the effectiveness and complexity, the post-conventional, and now needs to become flexible in what they identify with. So if you identify with all your effectiveness and your experience and your expertise and many more things, your status, how you're being viewed, then it becomes a challenge to move from here to here, because we see more and more leaders actually when we assess them. It's been booming in the last 5 years. We have more and more of these, what I call redefining. But it's very hard for them because one leader, he shared with me, my team members, they're complaining. They liked me so much more the way I was before. I was clear. I had a vision. I communicated that vision very clearly. And now all I'm doing is throwing questions at them. I'm making them work. I'm not ahead of them. I know I'm not ahead of them. I'm not trying to. I'm not pretending to. But they can't handle it. What am I going to do? So what we're trying to do here is to create an organizational culture that is aware of this tendency, and that it's not a weak leader that this person is growing into, but that this is an intermediate step to being the actual transforming force in the organization that we need. This one lifts his or her head above the status quo. This one, is this a timer? Is it for me? So this one is actually the first one truly capable of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Because this one really, really lives from that place. Not as a concept because 5 years ago it started booming, because it makes sense in the face of complexity to be coming from a multitude of different perspectives to actually have an idea of what we're dealing with and how to respond to it. A single person making a decision in a closed room is absolutely not appropriate. Okay, so I spoke about these. First freedom, second freedom, and actually after the self-transforming, there's another one that actually finally transcends this thing. Is it either about me or is it about the collective? Then it becomes one. But that's further down the road, and we call it third freedom. Just to give you a few numbers. The experts, still at 13%, and this is about leaders, right? They have been assessed worldwide, and we have a lot of data here. Still the achiever, the last conventional stage of mind, at 55. Redefining has been booming and is still booming and has a bit of a hard time to establish itself for the reasons that I mentioned. And the one that we actually need. I don't know if you are talking about transformation and not just change in your organization, but a transformation needs the mindset to do so. So, I will go a little bit, no, let's do that. I would like for you to take a moment and redefining mind, the one that I just tried to describe as the first post-conventional one, the one that steps back from I know a solution, or even thinking I am the kind of leader that has to have a solution, but not as a concept, but as a way of being. A touch of lightness is about the redefining leader. They don't take themselves that seriously often. Seriously enough, but not too seriously to get in their own way. So my question to you is, when was maybe a time recently where you yourself, either internally or in your way of speaking and acting, or somebody else in your team, may have been coming from this action logic, where they question something in a way where light bulbs went off. And you had a new perspective, and you were like, wow, that opens up what we call creativity and innovation. Just take a minute for yourself and your neighbor. Okay. So I wonder, is there maybe one of you that had an idea or remembered what could be a facet of any kind of redefining action logic in yourself and in others?
Jim has a really good one.
Yeah, let's hear it.
So, the one we talked about here, I think it applies. If it doesn't, I apologize, but I'm the one who's going to say something here. So, just the way we looked at indoor strategic planning from a perspective of, hey, you want to sit in a room with a group and kind of tell the company what to do. We are working right now, it's not 100% rolled out, about more getting input from different divisions to kind of set their goals to achieve what the corporate level wants to be, and then going back to departments and saying, then departments, what do you need to support the divisions, for the divisions to then support the corporate kind of, forward-thinking, higher horizontal type of structure. So it's not how we've done it in the past. It's going to be very different. I think people are going to raise their eyebrows a little bit, but I think once we get there, it'll make a little more sense. So anyway, not sure if that was there, but when your comments made me spark about how we're kind of redefining how we've done some of that planning.
Oh, wow, yeah, so cool, thank you. Thank you. Any other example? Okay, I would like to share with you what I learned from my wonderful interviews with some from the FEI community and beyond. So, the relationship with your CEO is your adaptive challenge. Well, what does that mean? Any idea what that means? An adaptive challenge? I mean, a challenge is enough, but does it have to be adaptive? What is that about? Any idea? So that's just a title I gave, right? I mean, I listened to all these interviews and tried to to condense them. And when I tried to categorize them, I saw, okay, here are some financial leaders, and I heard several of them speak about how, it's sometimes hard to manage the relationship between them and their CEO. And one of them said, I watch myself and I watch my colleagues, often we come together, and when the CEO is not in the room, we talk about them and how they are our problem. And that to me is a clear indicator that that is kind of the harbinger of you needing to grow to your next stage of meaning making. If that's how you can switch your perspective to say, it is not the CEO out here or whoever who's my problems, and if he or she changed, everything would be better. And by the way, not just for me, 10 other people are saying the same thing. I mean, that's what we do, right? We look for people who confirm that. And what I heard was really this thing of, we need to change. I mean, I need to step up. I need to find a way, because often I'm already so frustrated, I don't even say anything. Well, then, no wonder, right? So have that difficult conversation and really place that relevance on that relationship between you and him and her. And work on it and understand that that is the perfect challenge for you to grow. That's what adaptive challenge means. It's not them, their challenge. It's you, your challenge. Cultivating your meaning making. That's the idea. And that's what I'm inviting to say is put that spotlight on you, and it becomes fun when you know how to do it. This one I thought was really interesting. How about this as a hypothesis? When you lead your team in your finance department, you show up perhaps not only as a great achieving action logic leader, let's say, but maybe already redefining or even self-transforming. And then when you get into the group of the executive leadership team where the CEO is present, something shifts. Somehow you're not showing up that way. Maybe not quite as courageous, not as creative. And when I asked that question, there seemed to be some, that could be, that there is something that I'm bringing here, because I have a status, I'm a leader after all, and then I come here and something in me shifts and I lose courage, clarity, whatever. So to keep that in mind and to say, well, how can I bring those two together? How can I make that a strategic plan for me? Artful participation. So when you show up as a member, as a full member, and I'm fully also willing to hear if you say, Marion, you've got this all wrong. I mean, that may have been true for those 10 people that you spoke to. It's very different for me and us. But it seems that really clarifying your contribution to the overall success and strategy is something where you need to drive that. You need to drive that and not just kind of assume that people get it. When you're that, you bring the numbers and you do it in a skillful way, it doesn't mean that necessarily people are connecting the dots and really placing you as bringing the impact that you're actually bringing. You need to promote yourself in an active way. That's the idea. And consistently, for example, your CEO and others, of course, but really be open and go, how do I contribute best? How can I do it even better? And then when you've asked that and you've done things that you think correspond to that. Then ask for feedback, very specific feedback, so that you're very close to that target. Obviously, somebody who's made their way to that position has already been doing that, and this needs to be maybe even more cultivated, to take that time to reflect and stand back, even when things are stressful, especially when things are stressful. How do you make time to connect the dots? How do you make time to think about the problem and its fundamental nature, for example, so that you can actually respond with a decision-making process that fits this problem and not just because you need to do something. So cultivate, and again, I'm sure this is already the case, but cultivate it even more. Your personal shift from the operational, where you are seen maybe also as the numbers woman or guy, to the more strategically thinking one, the one that thinks in systems, that sees the foundational dynamics and that can integrate also the market and your position in it, that you need time to think this through, to have ideas, to bring this value to the executive leadership team meeting. So that seems to be relevant. And as an entire team and organization, always question your assumptions. And not just think about it, but really question it as you're in the meeting when it's uncomfortable and disruptive. Because you're great. Actually, this was somebody, I believe, from Finland I spoke to. I don't remember, but this was something I kept in mind. And also team up with your competitors. And competitors here is in quotes, because when we have great examples from organizations that have come together and then co-created solutions that were not only in some of their favor and interest, it was really creating a whole new pie. So not just everybody getting a piece of the pie, but really growing the pie together. So has the need for an advanced meaning making ever been greater? We think no. The state of our world, not just business, is showing that we have reached a limit where we need to think about business, about being a leader in a fundamentally different and new way. It's maybe more humble, it may be more participative, and all these things, and at the essence it has to do with this thing that happens here and starts everything. A few resources, and I'm happy for you to take pictures of this. These are some of the sources that I find very helpful. Great article. It's not that recent, but still very relevant. A lady called Jennifer Garvey-Berger, she works actually with Novartis and the CEO of Novartis, and has published some fantastic books on this in a very approachable way. Robert Keegan is an academic, a researcher, a little less accessible, yet very fundamental to this work. And if you want, a colleague of mine with a video and a presentation similar to mine today. So these are a few invitations that you can play around with. If there are two foundational things that I would say for you to start today as you leave here, look to build your skills. And I don't just mean, oh, now I will think about it from time to time. No, I mean skills, right? They're very concrete, and I can share more with you if you're interested, for inquiry. To leave that default mode of, I have to come to this meeting and know something. No. You have to come to this meeting and be more curious than anybody else in the room. And really follow up on that. Experimentation. Like you said, we were trying something new. So to be intentional about that and to say, what if? What if we tried this and then we track that and then learn from the challenge? Because often the cause and effect relationship between the things only reveal themselves in retrospect, not before we start. So we need safe-to-fail experiments. Ask yourself, this is Jennifer Garvey-Berger's favorite question, how can you be wrong? When this thought comes up and you think you know something from the past, and it's so relevant, everybody needs to hear it in the room, take a moment. How can I be wrong? What's the nature of this problem? Obviously, the Kinetic model. One of my favorite questions, is that person, when I judge that person, like, oh, God, I think they're too lazy, or they're not doing their work properly, or maybe they're only 3 years before retirement. I have all sorts of judgment about them. Maybe It's not about their willingness. Maybe it is about how they make meaning of the world. How do you know what you know? Not just what you know. How do you know what you know? What's the filter that you're looking through? And is it appropriate? And if you want to go back to this meaning-making machines of, if I see this as a problem, I can ask myself, what's going on here so that this seems like a problem to me? And from that perspective of my colleague, it doesn't seem like a problem at all. He sees it as a great challenge and is all excited about it. So what is it about me and my meaning-making that is creating and constructing this as a problem? Then you have awareness. I have to be somebody before I become nobody. That's the shift from the conventional to the post-conventional. First, you have to fully land in this very confident, I'm a leader, I know what I'm doing, I have a vision, I have a mission, I have, a track history to show. And now, how do you let go? How do you let go of all that stuff that you have worked so hard to identify with? What if it's not relevant sometimes? What if you, stepping away from that, relieves everybody in the room in a way where they, all of a sudden that psychological safety that everybody's talking about, it becomes possible. Because you show what it's like not to be attached to the status and to all of this, right? And that's something that doesn't happen overnight. But it has to also, again, to do with your meaning making and your action logic, whether you are very attached to it without knowing it sometimes, and how do you become skillful at letting it go and communicating that. Feast on your weaknesses, don't start on your ego, question your assumptions. Question your assumptions, and one of them is maybe you can install what we call an active observer that sits on your shoulder and sometimes questions things. An invitation. This is something that we have been doing for quite some time. We call it generative interview. So it's a conversation. If you are interested, if you have a VUCA topic, because that's what we're interested in, we're collecting those stories. Of course, they can be anonymous, not a question. But we would like to hear about, your pulse. We like to take your pulse and understand, what is it in the banking industry? What is it in the construction industry? What is it in whatever industry? What is it that you're dealing with? How do you see yourself and others responding as a default? And we would like for you to walk away from this interview with new perspective and having grown your cup, having grown your glass. So that's an invitation. Like I said, it's a win-win because we're deeply curious about these topics, and I would be happy for you to reach out to me and we can have a conversation. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thanks, Marion. I hope everyone has a few nuggets you can take away. My experience truly with all of you in this room is that you are extraordinary leaders. Continue to pay that forward, mentor others, grow your container however you can. And thank you again for your time. Enjoy your afternoon.